On live television, before 24 million Americans, Donald Trump sneered and accused Barack Obama of faking his Harvard law degree. The studio froze the nation, split in shock, and two legacies clashed under the blinding lights of a primetime town hall. When rage meets calm, when insult collides with proof, whose truth will America believe? In the next few seconds, you will witness the truth that they never wanted the public to know. On live television before 24 million Americans, Donald Trump leaned into the microphone, his grin curving like a blade. The studio lights bore down every corner tense. The words didn't fall, they detonated, sucking the air from the room. Trump sat back in his chair, satisfied, his eyes flashing with the smug delight of a man convinced he had just landed a fatal blow. He tilted his chin upward, scanning the audience as if searching for admiration, his hand resting on the desk like a hammer on an anvil. In his mind, this was checkmate. The crowd humiliated Obama. The cameras carried it nationwide, the insult immortalized. His smirk deepened, a predator savoring the silence after the kill. But the silence did not collapse into victory. It stretched it, thickened it, turned into something else. The moderator shifted in her seat papers, trembling in her hands as though the weight of the moment had suddenly grown heavier than her role. The studio's restless energy coiled tighter and tighter, waiting, begging for a response. In living rooms across Phoenix, Cleveland, and Des Moines, viewers leaned forward on their couches, eyes glued to the screen, some whispering aloud. What if it's true? Then, like a scene in a thriller, the giant screen behind the moderator flickered to life. Static buzzed for half a breath, and suddenly Barack Obama appeared. He was not standing at a podium, not dressed for combat, not surrounded by advisors. Instead, he sat in a modest Chicago office, bookshelves neatly stacked behind him, a single lamp casting warm light across his face. He didn't frown, didn't blink rapidly, didn't shift uncomfortably. He simply leaned back in his chair, composed, his lips curving into a calm, almost amused smile. The contrast was cinematic, one man swaggering in mockery, another radiating composure. Trump bristled, his arms crossing defensively, as though his smirk needed armor. The crowd held its breath, sensing that what was about to happen was larger than politics, larger than insults. It was about legacy colliding with mockery under the hottest lights America could shine. And Obama, framed in that glowing rectangle, looked directly into the lens with the stillness of a man who had carried storms, before the quiet strength of someone who knew calm can be more devastating than rage. The moderator shifted uneasily, her voice straining to sound steady as she adjusted the stack of papers in her hands. The overhead lights glared hotter now, beads of sweat glistening on her forehead. But it wasn't the heat, it was the silence. That silence had weight. It pressed down on the stage, on the audience, on the millions watching at home. She cleared her throat, tried to speak, but the moment was already spinning out of her control. Trump leaned forward, sensing the vacuum, his smirk twisting into something sharper. "Come on, Barack," he barked, his words snapping like a whip. "You know it's true. Everyone knows it. Harvard law, total scam." He chopped the air with his hand, each gesture meant to drive the accusation deeper. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the fire in his eyes, the arrogance in his posture. The crowd tensed like a drum, stretched too tight, ready to snap. In the third row, a young college student leaned close to his friend, his voice barely a whisper, but carried on the tension. This could be history. The words floated above the audience like prophecy. Around him, people clutched the edges of their chairs, torn between disbelief and morbid fascination. Phones were already in hands, recording live streaming, desperate to capture every frame of the duel unfolding on stage. Yet through it all, Obama did nothing. His image on the screen was still steady, unhurried. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even shift in his chair. Instead, he allowed the silence to grow, feeding it, stretching it until the air was trembling. It was a move that felt less like hesitation and more like calculation. The patience of a chess master staring at an opponent who had just overplayed his hand. The longer he waited, the more the audience leaned in their anticipation, spiraling into a near frenzy. The moderator tried again, her voice cracking against the weight of the room. "Mr. President," she said, turning toward the screen, "do you care to respond?" Her tone was steady, but her eyes betrayed desperation, as if she were throwing a rope into the void, praying Obama would take it and pull the broadcast back from chaos. The audience shifted, murmuring, every head pivoting toward the glowing screen. And still Obama didn't speak. He sat back calm, letting the silence roar louder than Trump's insults. The tension became unbearable. Trump's fingers drummed violently against the desk, his jaw tight, his impatience raw. He thrived on chaos, but this stillness, this unshakable calm was suffocating him. The silence had turned into a weapon, and he wasn't the one holding it. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a nervous laugh escaped, breaking like glass against stone, and then silence reclaimed the room once more. Every eye locked on the screen, every breath synchronized with the pause. America itself seemed to lean forward, waiting for Obama's first word. Then, cutting through the tension like a blade through glass, Obama chuckled. It wasn't loud, it wasn't mocking. It was quiet, almost disarming, a sound so out of place in the storm that it froze the room. Trump's eyes narrowed, his smirk, faltering for the first time, as if he had expected anger, not amusement. The audience stirred, confused, caught between relief and anticipation, their silence now buzzing with the question, what is he about to do? Obama leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady, his tone measured. It's interesting, he said, his voice smooth as velvet, to hear someone question credentials, when the real question is, what have we actually built? Who have we lifted up? The words hung in the air, soft but sharp, flipping the spotlight from his degree to his deeds. The shift was palpable. The room itself seemed to tilt. Trump leaned back, his jaw tight, suddenly forced into the role of spectator. The former president didn't rush, didn't stumble. He began to name names, weaving them into the moment like a master storyteller. Judge Linda Carver, who presides over cases in Cincinnati. Daniel Brooks, fighting for civil rights in Detroit. His delivery was calm, factual, but each name landed like a hammer blow, undeniable proof forged in human lives. Murmurs rose from the audience. A wave of recognition, the kind of sound that builds before applause. Trump's fingers twitched on the desk, his bravado cracking beneath the weight of credibility. And then the applause came, scattered at first, then louder, echoing through the studio like thunder rolling in from a distance. Obama sat back, not basking, not gloating, simply letting the moment breathe. The contrast was brutal. Trump's insults, jagged and loud, now felt small against the backdrop of calm authority. The camera cut between the two men, the aggressor losing ground, the professor reclaiming it with composure. The energy shifted. For the first time that night, the audience wasn't laughing at a jab or holding its breath for chaos. They were leaning toward Obama, pulled into the gravity of his words. Trump's smirk was gone, replaced by the taut mask of a man who realized too late he had triggered something he couldn't control. And as the lights burned hotter and the crowd swelled with murmurs, a question loomed over the room, over the nation itself. Had Donald Trump just lost control of the stage this early? Because in that moment, the answer felt terrifyingly close. Obama's calm had turned the insult into fuel, and the lesson was clear: sometimes the softest voice in the room cuts the deepest. And somewhere deep inside every viewer, from the third row of the studio to millions of living rooms across America, a new question echoed, heavier than any insult. When mocked in public, what holds more power, a louder insult or a calm truth? The moment Obama's calm reply hit the airwaves, living rooms across America froze as if someone had cut the power. In Phoenix, a family of 5 stopped mid-dinner, forks, suspended, eyes locked on the television, as the replay of Trump's accusation collided with Obama's quiet defense. In Cleveland, a construction worker leaned forward on his couch, muttering, "No way he just flipped that," while his teenage son scrambled for his phone to record the clip off the screen. In Des Moines, a grandmother turned down the volume on her stove timer, unwilling to let even a beep distract her from the unfolding confrontation. And then the ripple began. Screens lit up like fireworks as millions reached for their phones, capturing, sharing, amplifying. TikTok feeds split in half: on one side, Trump's sneer; on the other, Obama's steady gaze. Hashtags surged to life. Hashtag degree of truth. Hashtag Obama vs. Trump, climbing trending boards in real time, spreading like wildfire through digital veins. The footage was clipped, remixed, slowed down, zoomed in. Every pause, every smirk, every chuckle was dissected and looped, played on 1,000 screens in diners, bars, and dorm rooms. Disbelief clashed with validation. Some viewers gaped at their screens, whispering, "Did Trump really go that far?" Others grinned with vindication, finally hearing Obama answer what felt like years of mockery with one calm, devastating strike. The emotional current was electric, whipping back and forth across living rooms like a storm surge. In living rooms, arguments flared, one brother shaking his head at Obama's composure, another insisting, "That's leadership." Families debated, voices rising, yet none could pull themselves away from the screen. The footage wasn't just being watched, it was being felt. Across kitchens, bedrooms, and street corners, America's pulse quickened, caught between disbelief and recognition. The town hall was no longer confined to a studio. It had spilled into homes, burrowed into conversations, and embedded itself in the country's bloodstream. For millions, the night was no longer entertainment. It was proof that history was unfolding in real time, and they were watching it from the edge of their couches. Within minutes, the clip tore free from the confines of television and detonated across the internet. Twitter feeds erupted, timelines flooded with 20-second edits, showing Trump's sneer freeze-framed against Obama's measured smile. On TikTok, the split-screen duels multiplied, half the frame showing the insult, half showing Obama's chuckle captions, flashing fake degree versus proof through students. Hashtags climbed like rockets. Hashtag degree of truth. Hashtag Obama vs. Trump. Hashtag class vs. chaos, each one stacking millions of views before the moderators could even catch their breath. The confrontation was no longer a town hall. It had mutated into viral currency. YouTube channels pounced instantly, posting breakdowns with titles in all caps. "Trump humiliates Obama," or "Obama destroys Trump," with one line. The thumbnails scream faces frozen mid-expression, arrows pointing at the smirk, the chuckle, the hand gesture that launched 1,000 debates. Comment sections filled like battlefields, one side chanting, "Fake degree fraud," while the other roared, "Facts matter, students don't lie." The divide was visible, feral, and irresistible. People weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. In classrooms the next morning, teachers rolled projectors forward, pulling up the replay as though it were a historical document. Students leaned in, some laughing, some whispering, others scribbling notes for debate club. "Watch this," one teacher said, pausing on the moment Obama named Judge Linda Carver. This is rhetoric in action. This is why composure matters. For the teenagers in the room, it felt less like politics and more like a lesson they weren't supposed to forget. And across the country, other educators did the same, weaving the viral clip into lessons on credibility, evidence, and the power of restraint. Yet for every cheer, there was outrage. Conservative blogs lit up with headlines accusing Obama of parading fictional students, while progressive outlets published profiles on Carver and Brooks within hours, proving their existence. Screens glowed in diners and subways, commuters replaying the exchange in disbelief, shaking their heads at Trump's audacity, or nodding fiercely in agreement with his blunt attack. The nation wasn't just watching anymore. It was arguing with itself in real time. The division pulsed with curiosity, feeding itself with each retweet, each remix, each slow-motion breakdown. Could Trump actually prove his claim? Could Obama's credibility stand unshaken? The questions lingered like smoke after an explosion, clouding every conversation from office water coolers to kitchen tables. And through it all, the clip spread further, faster, deeper, an unstoppable tide that carried both mockery and validation in equal measure. What had begun as a single insult was now a national obsession, and America was only just beginning to realize the storm it had unleashed. Obama leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile flickering across his face, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. His voice calm but resonant, sliced cleanly through the static of Trump's fury. "You know, Donald, I've spent years in classrooms teaching young men and women about the Constitution, about justice, about how to serve something bigger than themselves. Some of those students are now leaders, real leaders. Take Judge Linda Carver presiding over cases in Cincinnati, or Daniel Brooks, who's out there in Detroit fighting for civil rights every single day." The audience shifted, a murmur swelling like an incoming wave. Names, places, real people. The silence that had once belonged to Trump's insult now belonged to Obama's proof. Trump stiffened his eyes, narrowing his fingers, twitching against the desk as if he could claw the words back into Obama's throat. But the words were already out alive, unshakable. They weren't theory, they were testimony. The moderator leaned forward, her earpiece crackling, her eyes darting to the producers off stage. She hesitated for a breath, then spoke carefully. For the record, both Judge Linda Carver and attorney Daniel Brooks are confirmed. Both have publicly credited President Obama as one of their mentors. The words hit like gunfire. The audience erupted, the applause detonating in the hall, ricocheting against the walls, spilling over into a standing ovation from pockets of the crowd. Trump's jaw tightened, his smirk dissolving into something brittle. He slammed his palm lightly on the desk as if the noise could drown out the sound of vindication. But it was too late, the balance had shifted. The split-screen image told the story more clearly than any commentator. Could one man trapped in rage, the other weaponizing calm with receipts. The clapping wouldn't stop. It spread like fire in dry grass, first a spark, then a blaze, until the entire studio seemed to shake with it. Obama didn't flinch, didn't lean into bask. He simply waited, letting the noise wash over him like confirmation of what he already knew. Every cheer, every clap was a nail sealing his credibility, each one hammering Trump's accusation into irrelevance. At that moment, vindication wasn't abstract. It had a face, a name, a pulse. It was Judge Carver in her courtroom, Daniel Brooks in the streets of Detroit, every student who had ever carried forward the lessons Obama had given them. Trump's words had tried to erase a degree. Obama's words had resurrected a legacy. And as the applause roared higher, the question crackled like electricity through every screen across America. Had the insult already collapsed under the weight of truth? The applause thundered, but Obama didn't ride the wave. He waited, letting it crest and fall until the room was his again. Then, with a calm that felt heavier than any shout, he leaned closer to the camera. I remember those nights, he began, his voice low, steady, pulling the audience in as though he were speaking to each of them alone. Stacks of case law on the table, tired eyes staring back at me, but still asking questions that mattered, questions about justice, about truth, about who gets heard in this country. He painted the scene with precision, a cramped classroom lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, students with coffee-stained notes arguing long past midnight about constitutional precedents. He spoke of Linda Carver's relentless questions, of Daniel Brooks's refusal to accept easy answers, of the moments when silence in the room was broken by laughter or the scrape of a pencil when clarity finally struck. These weren't abstractions, they were living memories, forged in sweat struggle and the stubborn pursuit of truth. The studio shifted. Audience members leaned forward, captivated, not by spectacle, but by substance. On split screens across America, families felt a tug of recognition. Parents remembered the teachers who had once believed in them. Students saw themselves in the sleepless nights and the difficult questions. That's leadership, someone whispered from the front row, the phrase catching fire as murmurs rippled outward. It was no longer about a degree on paper. It was about the lives shaped in those classrooms. Trump sat motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes darting as if searching for a way to interrupt, to break the spell. But the spell was unbreakable. Obama wasn't defending himself anymore. He was building a legacy brick by brick, laying down the stories of those who had carried his lessons into the world. Each name, each memory struck harder than any rebuttal could. The contrast was merciless, one man rooted in insults, the other in mentorship that had grown into living proof. Beyond the studio, the echo deepened. Teachers across the country nodded at their screens, pride swelling as if they too were on trial and had just been vindicated. Students texted each other furiously. Did you hear that he's talking about our classrooms, our future? In diners, barber shops, and subway cars, strangers nodded in unison, their chests tightening with nostalgia for the people who had once guided them. Pride mingled with memory, weaving a collective story larger than politics. And in that swelling tide of pride and nostalgia, the question shifted. It wasn't about whether Obama's degree was real. It was about whether leadership could be measured in paper or in the people you left standing stronger behind you. As the applause rose again, softer this time, but deeper, more reverent, America seemed to exhale all at once. The insult had triggered a fight, but the echo of the classroom had turned it into something far more enduring, a lesson. Trump couldn't hold it anymore. He leaned forward, his voice cutting through the applause like a jagged blade. Stories don't prove anything, He snapped the words sharp, dismissive, dripping with contempt. His hand slammed against the desk, sending a dull thud echoing through the studio. The audience flinched, the applause faltering as if the violence in his tone had cracked the spell Obama had woven. But Obama didn't flinch. He waited, letting Trump's words hang in the air, heavy and bitter, until the silence became unbearable again. Then, with the calm precision of a surgeon, he spoke, "Stories are proof, Donald. Proof of lives changed. Proof of work done. Proof of lessons that don't fade when the lights go out." His words weren't shouted, they were anchored, deliberate, each one hitting harder because of the stillness that wrapped them. The audience murmured a low rumble that carried across the hall like thunder approaching. A woman in the second row clasped her hands to her chest, whispering, "Yes," while a college student raised his phone higher to capture every second. On screens across the country, people paused, mid-scroll, struck not by volume, but by the weight of what had just been said. Trump's cynicism had thrown down a gauntlet, and Obama had answered with legacy. Trump shook his head, scoffing, trying to laugh it off. "You're just good at stories," he sneered, his voice louder, now the desperation leaking through. "That's all you've ever had, stories. But stories don't put food on the table. Stories don't fix America." His words were fast, almost frantic, meant to puncture the balloon of momentum building around his opponent. But the cameras caught it, the tightened jaw, the restless fingers, the eyes that betrayed a man rattled. Obama didn't rush. He leaned back, almost relaxed, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "Stories are what we remember, Donald. They're what guide us. They're what endure. You can tear paper. You can deny numbers. But you can't erase the people who carry what you've taught them into their own lives. That's the only proof that matters." His voice didn't rise, but the room did, erupting into applause that was louder, steadier, and sharper than before. The clash was unmistakable cynicism against legacy, derision against dignity. Trump had thrown fire, but Obama had turned it into light. For the first time, the imbalance was visible, one man fighting to mock the other, fighting to remind, to plant seeds that could not be uprooted. The applause rolled like thunder, drowning out Trump's attempts to interrupt, leaving him tapping his desk, shaking his head, his power slipping like sand through clenched fists. And as the ovation swelled, a question spread like smoke from the studio into every home, every feed, every whispered debate across America. Had Trump underestimated the emotional weight of education? Or more haunting still, what defines proof, numbers and papers, or the people who carry your lessons into the world? The studio thunder rolled outward, spilling into the veins of the nation, and suddenly America itself was the audience. In a crowded ER break room in Houston, nurses on their night shift huddled around a flickering television. One of them, still in scrubs, stained from a 12-hour shift, pointed at the screen with a tired grin. "That right there, that's what leadership looks like." Another shook her head, muttering, "But why's Trump even going there?" Degrees, really? The debate broke out instantly, their exhaustion forgotten, their voices rising over the hum of vending machines. In Cleveland, a group of construction workers crowded a corner table at a bar, boots still caked with dust pitchers of beer half empty. The replay flashed across the big screen above them, Trump sneering, Obama smiling. One man slammed his fist against the table. "Say what you want, but the man's calm, he's steady." "That counts." His buddy fired back. "Steady don't fix gas prices, man." The argument spun half the table, nodding, half scowling. The bartender shaking her head as if she'd seen this before. America divided even over bar stools. On college campuses from Boston to Denver, dorm lounges turned into miniature arenas. Students shouted over each other, phones propped up on makeshift tripods to catch TikTok live reactions. One group erupted when Obama's line about stories replayed. "That's it," a sophomore yelled, slapping the couch arm. "That's mentorship, that's what matters." Across the hall, another group scoffed. "It's just talk, what about results?" The walls practically vibrated with the clash, energy bouncing between idealism and cynicism. And in a veterans hall in Des Moines, older men and women in worn jackets sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked on the muted television as captions replayed the exchange. A Vietnam vet with a cane leaned forward, whispering, "I don't care what you think of his politics, that's a soldier's calm. That's knowing when not to flinch." A younger Iraq veteran shook his head. "Or maybe it's just theater," he countered, But even he couldn't look away. The room hummed with recognition, whether admiration or suspicion. Everyone felt the weight of the moment. Across sports bars, diners, living rooms, the split screens told the same story, one side erupting in cheers, the other folding arms in defiance. But underneath the arguments, beneath the shouts and murmurs, there was something else, an electric pulse of recognition. Everyone knew they weren't just watching a spat on television. They were watching an idea of America collide with itself, rage against composure, cynicism against legacy, noise against truth. And as the replays rolled again and again, the tension didn't fade, it deepened. Every ordinary voice from nurses to veterans joined into the roar of the national conversation. Every cheer, every scoff, every whispered. Its leadership stitched another thread into a tapestry that stretched coast to coast. It wasn't about who won the stage anymore. It was about who owned the story in the hearts of the people. By dawn, the nation's airwaves were ablaze. CNN cut into its regular programming with urgent chyrons in red Obama fires. Back education is earned, not given. Anchors leaned forward at their desks, voices sharp with urgency, replaying the clip in slow motion, analyzing every frame of Obama's calm and Trump's sneer. This wasn't just a rebuttal, one analyst declared, tapping the screen where Obama leaned into the camera. This was a reframing of the debate itself. MSNBC took the moment and ran it like a marathon. Panels of professors, historians, and civil rights leaders filled the screen, their voices layered with awe and gravity. This line, "Education is earned, not given," it will live on, a commentator insisted, eyes wide, as if she had just witnessed a turning point in history. He transformed an insult into a universal truth. The clip looped in the background, each replay hammering the phrase deeper into the public consciousness, chiseling it into something larger than politics. On Fox, the tone was sharper, defensive, even mocking. Hosts framed Obama's words as elitist, insisting he had dodged the question. Americans don't care about law school stories, one anchor scoffed, stabbing a finger at the camera. They care about putting food on the table. Trump is speaking their language, yet even as they tried to reframe the narrative, the clip played on their screens too, the very words they tried to downplay, burning their way into millions of living rooms. The polarization was instant, violent, and inescapable. Social media and television fused into a single storm, one half of America clutching Obama's line as proof of dignity and resilience, the other wielding Trump's accusation as a rallying cry. Hashtags splintered like fault lines, hashtag education, earned trending alongside hashtag fake degree, both climbing into millions of mentions. Across newsrooms, editors barked orders, lead with a soundbite, get the fact checks live, spin the story before the other networks do. In diners, the televisions mounted above booths flickered between channels, conversations rising with each switch. A waitress in Milwaukee set down coffee mugs while muttering, "Every channel's got a different truth." A man at the counter shook his head, watching Obama's calm replayed yet again. Doesn't matter what they say, he won that moment. The screen changed, Fox replaying the insult instead, and another voice cut in. Or maybe Trump did. The divide was visceral, playing out not just on air, but in every corner of public life. The frenzy wasn't cooling, it was accelerating. Each network poured gasoline on the fire, each analyst turning the confrontation into a weapon for their audience. But through the noise, one thing was undeniable. Obama's line had cut through sharp and enduring. Education is earned, not given wasn't just a response. It was a headline, a hashtag, a rallying cry. And as it replayed for the 100th time across screens coast to coast, America wasn't just watching anymore, it was choosing what story to believe. By nightfall, the battlefield had shifted from television studios to the endless trenches of social media. Twitter pulsed like a live wire, every second birthing new posts, new edits, new declarations of war. On one side surged hashtag Obama mic drop, fueled by looped clips of his calm retort and the devastating invocation of Judge Carver. On the other side raged hashtag fake degree, hammered out in all caps by loyalists repeating Trump's accusation like a mantra. The feeds were split-screen chaos, truth and fury, colliding at the speed of refresh. TikTok was a storm all its own. One viral clip cut the exchange down to a brutal 15 seconds, Trump snarling fake degree, followed by Obama's calm reply, Judge Carver Daniel Brooks. The caption was merciless. Trump said fake. Obama said Judge Carver, checkmate. Within hours, the video racked up millions of views stitched into countless reactions. Students gasping, veterans nodding, teachers wiping tears from their eyes. The comments section became a war zone, some shouting receipts while others spat back lies. Yet the momentum was undeniable. The calm truth was trending louder than the rage. Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts magnified the divide. Edits layered dramatic music under Obama's chuckle, framing it as the moment he dismantled the entire accusation with nothing but composure. Meanwhile, Trump supporters countered with memes of shredded diplomas, captions screaming, "Where's the proof?" The culture war compressed into a hashtag duel, each side convinced their tag carried the real America. Screens across the nation glowed with the same fire, but the flames burned in two different directions. The White House war room was in panic. Aides huddled around laptops watching the graph of hashtag Obama McDrop climb past hashtag fake degree, a digital heartbeat pounding faster with each refresh. "We're losing the narrative," one whispered, his voice hoarse. Another slammed a fist on the table, demanding more aggressive posts, more attacks. But no tweet, no post, no meme seemed to blunt the clip that refused to die. Every attempt to discredit it only made it spread faster. And in the streets, the split was visible. College students marched into coffee shops wearing shirts freshly printed with "education earned, not given." In small towns, bumper stickers appeared overnight, reading "fake degree, Reina, fake president." The hashtags had leapt off the screen and into the real world, each side branding itself in defiance of the other. The nation wasn't just debating, it was choosing armor, preparing for war. Momentum shifted the tide, turning visibly in the feeds in the bars and the classrooms, replaying the clip. Yet beneath the roar of applause and the cascade of trending tags, a darker question gnawed at the edges of the digital frenzy. Was Trump's base about to fracture under the weight of truth, or would doubling down become its own kind of victory? And louder still whispered like a warning across the divide. When truth trends, does it unify or does it carve the fault lines even deeper? Trump's smirk was gone, replaced by a tightness that carved itself into every line of his face. His jaw clenched so hard the microphone nearly picked up the grind of his teeth. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk like a man ready to flip the whole stage, his voice rising into a sharp blade that cut through the roar of applause. "You fooled America," once he spat, eyes blazing at the camera. "You won't again." The words cracked like a whip, the fury in them impossible to mistake. The room stiffened under the force of his tone. Audience members who had laughed earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between Trump's rage and Obama's unwavering calm on the screen. Trump's hand slammed down, rattling his microphone, the thud echoing like a gunshot through the hall. 8 years of lies, he barked, pointing a trembling finger toward the projection of Obama. 8 years of weakness. And now you sit there smiling, pretending like it was all real. His voice broke not with fatigue, but with the raw strain of anger boiling over. Camera operators zoomed in, catching the sweat glistening along his temple, the twitch in his jaw, the storm brewing just beneath his skin. The moderator tried to interject her words, drowned by Trump's growl as he talked over her, louder and sharper with each passing second. America deserves better than a fraud. A man who built his legacy on stories, on myths, on shadows. His voice pitched higher, the aggression blurring into desperation. The energy in the room flipped. The applause from earlier now hung heavy in the air, replaced by murmurs and scattered gasps. Some Trump supporters cheered louder, trying to will his rage into strength, but others folded their arms uneasy at the spectacle of a man unraveling in front of millions. The studio lights seemed hotter, harsher, catching every bead of sweat, every jagged edge of his fury. His anger wasn't just visible, it was palpable, a living thing thrashing across the stage. Meanwhile, Obama's face on the giant screen hadn't changed. He remained still, patient, watching like a man who'd weathered storms far greater than this. That composure only sharpened the contrast. Trump's fury was fire bright but uncontrolled, while Obama's silence was stone, immovable, and enduring. The juxtaposition burned itself into every camera angle, every viewer's memory. And as Trump's voice thundered one last time, "You won't fool them again," the audience sat caught between adrenaline and unease. The aggression had peaked, but instead of drowning Obama, it seemed to magnify him. For every shout Trump unleashed, the silence on the other side grew heavier, stronger, more unshakable. The hall had turned into a battlefield of fire against water, and for the first time it wasn't clear if Trump's flames were consuming his opponent or himself. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. 5-on-2, Obama's calm retort. The storm of Trump's voice still echoed through the studio when Obama leaned forward, his hands folded lightly on the desk in front of him. His expression hadn't shifted, calm, steady, almost unnervingly composed against the tempest of fury on the other side of the split screen. He waited for the last of Trump's words to fade, waited for the sound of his rage to collapse under its own weight. Then in a voice so measured it cut deeper than any shout he spoke, "The truth doesn't need to shout. It endures." The words landed like a gavel strike. For a heartbeat, the studio was paralyzed, the silence stretching tight enough to snap. Then the audience erupted applause, bursting from the front rows and racing backward until it became a tidal wave of sound. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, their energy colliding with the fluorescent lights and bouncing off the cameras. Even those who had stayed silent before now leaned in, drawn into the gravity of words that felt less like rhetoric and more like a verdict. On the other side of the stage, Trump froze, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with something between anger and disbelief. He had thundered, slammed his fist, unleashed every ounce of fire he had, but the calm had swallowed it whole. Some of his supporters in the crowd tried to chant, their voices sharp and ragged, but their noise was drowned beneath the rhythm of clapping palms. Others sat back in their seats, arms crossed, their eyes darting uneasily toward Obama's glowing image on the screen. The cameras caught everything, the contrast brutal, cinematic. Trump's face, flushed red lips, pressed into a thin line, sweat glistening under the lights. Obama, by comparison, leaned back slightly, letting the applause wash over the studio without a trace of triumph on his face. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to raise his voice. The line had already transformed into something larger than a rebuttal. It was a mantra etched into the night like a scar across steel. Viewers at home felt it too. In kitchens and living rooms across the country, people repeated the words out loud, some whispering them, others saying them with conviction. The truth doesn't need to shout. It endures. A teacher in Omaha scribbled it on a whiteboard for her morning class. A veteran in Atlanta leaned back in his recliner and muttered, "That's how you stand your ground." On social media, the quote blazed across feeds in bold letters, already repackaged into viral graphics and stitched into clips. Back in the studio, the moderator struggled to regain control, her voice nearly drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The cameras panned across the audience, catching faces lit with admiration, respect, and something harder to fake belief. Respect for the calm that had cut through the fury, belief in the endurance of something bigger than insults. For the first time that night, the energy in the room was not chaos, but clarity. And as the applause swelled one last time, echoing like thunder across the hall, the power dynamic shifted in plain sight. Trump's rage had been ablaze, loud, scorching, but fleeting. Obama's words were the embers left behind, glowing steady, refusing to die out. The crowd knew it. The cameras knew it. America knew it. In that moment, respect did not belong to the loudest voice, it belonged to the calmest truth. The storm of Trump's voice still echoed through the studio when Obama leaned forward, his hands folded lightly on the desk in front of him. His expression hadn't shifted, calm, steady, almost unnervingly composed against the tempest of fury on the other side of the split screen. He waited for the last of Trump's words to fade, waited for the sound of his rage to collapse under its own weight. Then in a voice so measured it cut deeper than any shout he spoke, "The truth doesn't need to shout. It endures." The words landed like a gavel strike. For a heartbeat, the studio was paralyzed, the silence stretching tight enough to snap. Then the audience erupted, applause bursting from the front rows and racing backward until it became a tidal wave of sound. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, their energy colliding with the fluorescent lights and bouncing off the cameras. Even those who had stayed silent before now leaned in, drawn into the gravity of words that felt less like rhetoric and more like a verdict. On the other side of the stage, Trump froze his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with something between anger and disbelief. He had thundered, slammed his fist, unleashed every ounce of fire he had, but the calm had swallowed it whole. Some of his supporters in the crowd tried to chant, their voices sharp and ragged, but their noise was drowned beneath the rhythm of clapping palms. Others sat back in their seats, arms crossed, their eyes darting uneasily toward Obama's glowing image on the screen. The cameras caught everything, the contrast brutal, cinematic. Trump's face flushed, red lips pressed into a thin line, sweat glistening under the lights. Obama, by comparison, leaned back slightly, letting the applause wash over the studio without a trace of triumph on his face. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to raise his voice. The line had already transformed into something larger than a rebuttal. It was a mantra etched into the night like a scar across steel. Viewers at home felt it too. In kitchens and living rooms across the country, people repeated the words out loud, some whispering them, others saying them with conviction. The truth doesn't need to shout. It endures. A teacher in Omaha scribbled it on a whiteboard for her morning class. A veteran in Atlanta leaned back in his recliner and muttered, "That's how you stand your ground." On social media, the quote blazed across feeds in bold letters, already repackaged into viral graphics and stitched into clips. Back in the studio, the moderator struggled to regain control, her voice nearly drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The cameras panned across the audience, catching faces lit with admiration, respect, and something harder to fake belief. Respect for the calm that had cut through the fury, belief in the endurance of something bigger than insults. For the first time that night, the energy in the room was not chaos, but clarity. And as the applause swelled one last time, echoing like thunder across the hall, the power dynamic shifted in plain sight. Trump's rage had been ablaze, loud, scorching, but fleeting. Obama's words were the embers left behind, glowing steady, refusing to die out. The crowd knew it. The cameras knew it. America knew it. In that moment, respect did not belong to the loudest voice, it belonged to the calmest truth. The applause still thundered when Obama leaned forward again, his eyes fixed on the camera with the calm intensity of a professor delivering the lesson no one would forget. His voice was steady, deliberate, cutting through the noise like a clean blade. If my degree was fake, then every student I taught imagined those lessons. Every lecture, every late-night study session, every debate about justice, they must have been hallucinations. The words carried a quiet weight heavier than any accusation Trump had hurled, and the studio fell still again, hanging on the gravity of what had just been said. Trump shifted uneasily, his jaw tightening, as the audience murmured their reactions, no longer hesitant, but charged with recognition. It wasn't just about one man's degree anymore. It was about the countless people who had sat in those classrooms, who had carried pieces of those lessons into their own lives. The camera cut to the moderator, her eyes widening as if she knew the line would be replayed, dissected, and remembered long after the town hall ended. For the first time, it wasn't Trump's words that echoed, it was Obama's. Across the nation, screens lit up with a different kind of energy. Teachers posted photos of their diplomas, holding them like shields, captions, reading "Education is earned, not given." Parents uploaded snapshots of their children's graduation days, writing, "No one can fake this pride." College students filmed TikToks, stacks of textbooks piled beside them, repeating Obama's line over dramatic music. A movement was forming in real-time, digital solidarity, rising like a tide, each post hammering the same point: proof isn't in paper, it's in people. The momentum was unmistakable. Hashtags like hashtag resume of truth and hashtag lessons lived surged alongside hashtag Obama mic drop, transforming the confrontation into a campaign of collective pride. News anchors replayed the clip, their voices tinged with awe. He reframed the debate in a single sentence. Commentators leaned back in their chairs, admitting sometimes reluctantly that the line had transcended politics. It had become cultural shorthand, a rallying cry for educators, parents, and students alike. Meanwhile, Trump sat in the studio, his fury visible, but his words suddenly powerless. Every attempt to interject was drowned by applause, by chants, by the echo of Obama's line, bouncing across the room and out into the world. He had tried to weaponize doubt, but now doubt was dissolving, replaced by something far stronger: pride. The crowd wasn't just clapping anymore, they were claiming the words as their own. And as the camera zoomed in on Obama's steady expression, the question lingered over the studio, over the networks, over the very fabric of the night. Had he just reframed the debate permanently? Or as millions of posts surged across timelines, the deeper question glowed like a warning? What endures longer, credentials questioned, or legacies lived by the next morning, the confrontation had already left the studio and seeped into the arteries of everyday America. In high schools and universities, projectors flickered to life as teachers replayed Obama's words not as politics, but as a lesson in persuasion. A history teacher in Omaha froze the clip just as Obama leaned in and delivered the now famous line, "If my degree was fake, then every student I taught imagined those lessons." She turned to her class and said, "That's not just a rebuttal, that's a masterclass." Pens scribbled, heads nodded, and a room full of restless teenagers leaned forward as though the screen itself was a blackboard. In debate, clubs, and college lecture halls, students dissected the cadence, the pauses, the deliberate restraint. They noted how Obama had let Trump's rage burn itself out before dropping words that landed like iron. Professors highlighted the psychological precision of silence as weaponry, drawing diagrams on whiteboards: volume versus composure, anger versus endurance. For once, young people who normally rolled their eyes at lectures found themselves captivated, murmuring to each other, "That's how you win without shouting." The classroom had become a theater of empowerment, every lesson alive with the pulse of the night before. Far from campuses, the echo found its way into break rooms and factory floors. In Detroit, auto workers hunched over their phones during lunch breaks, passing one screen down the line like contraband. "Listen to this one," said, replaying the moment Obama invoked Judge Carver. The clatter of machinery outside was drowned by their laughter, their nods, the pride swelling in their voices. "That's proof. That's how you shut somebody down." Sandwiches went half-eaten as workers replayed the clip again and again, savoring the calm precision that had toppled fury. In hospital cafeterias, nurses scrolled between bites, exhausted but invigorated by what they saw. One pulled out her phone and whispered to her colleague, "The truth doesn't need to shout, it endures." The phrase passed down the table like a secret mantra, each repeating it under their breath, with a mix of awe and relief. For a few minutes, the stress of the ward faded, replaced by the collective recognition that composure could still triumph over chaos. Their smiles weren't about politics, they were about possibility. Even in corporate towers, where boardrooms normally buzzed with spreadsheets and market forecasts, workers huddled in corners, watching the confrontation unfold on loop. A manager paused a meeting to play the clip, pointing out how Obama had reframed an attack into an advantage. "That's not just spin," he said, "that's strategy." Employees exchanged glances, a rare moment of agreement cutting across cubicles and titles. For once, the office didn't feel like hierarchy. It felt like solidarity bound by a single line delivered with unshakable calm. The ripple wasn't just about Obama, it was about everyone watching themselves reflected in the lesson. Teachers saw their labor validated, students saw their futures defended, workers saw their dignity reinforced. In every corner, from classrooms to cafeterias, people repeated the same thought with pride swelling in their chests. The truth doesn't need to shout, it endures. And as the phrase spread not as a headline, but as a lived mantra, empowerment coursed through the veins of ordinary life, reminding millions that dignity, when wielded with patience, could still silence chaos. The wave that began in classrooms and break rooms didn't stop there. It surged straight into the halls of power. By midday, reporters crowded Capitol Hill corridors, shoving microphones toward lawmakers who could no longer dodge the question. Senator Mark Latham of Ohio, a Republican known for rarely praising Democrats, shook his head and muttered into the cameras, "Look, I've disagreed with Obama on plenty, but Harvard doesn't hand out fake degrees. That's just common sense." His words ricocheted through news feeds, the rare note of validation cutting through the noise. Democrats seized the moment, their press conferences overflowing with clips of Obama's calm rebuttal. "This isn't just about Barack Obama," one representative declared, her voice sharp with conviction. "This is about every teacher, every student, every family who knows education is earned, not given." Behind her, a wall of young aides tapped furiously on their phones, pushing the quote, across platforms until it burned into the national conversation like scripture. The party had found a rallying cry, and it was spreading faster than any stump speech. Civil rights groups amplified the moment with surgical precision. The NAACP blasted out a video montage, Obama's line intercut with black and white footage of segregated classrooms, college sit-ins, and civil rights marches. The caption read, "Education has always been proof. Legacy has always been real." Within hours, the video racked up millions of views, praised for tying a single soundbite to generations of struggle. Leaders took to podiums, reminding crowds that to question education as fraud was to question the very fight that had carried so many Americans from the margins into the mainstream. Even global voices joined the chorus. A British MP tweeted, "If this is the debate America is having, the world is watching and it knows the difference between rage and resilience." Journalists in France and South Africa ran editorials marveling at how one line could shift the narrative so dramatically. Internationally, the confrontation had stopped being about one man's degree and become a symbol of the stakes when truth and fury collide under the lights of democracy. Meanwhile, inside the White House, aides scrambled to contain the fallout. Anonymous leaks spilled into the press Trump's inner circle, furious that his tweets had backfired, that Obama's calm was being studied as if it were scripture. He made it bigger. One aide confessed off the record, voice edged with panic. "The more he yells, the stronger Obama looks." Headlines mirrored the sentiment, Trump's rage, Obama's restraint, who won the night for once. The answer seemed less partisan than expected. Validation came not just from one side, but from voices across the spectrum, each admitting in their own way that the attack had collapsed under its own weight. And as lawmakers, activists, and global commentators piled on, the truth spread like a drumbeat, steady and unrelenting. Proof wasn't in paper or accusations. Proof was in lives, lived in lessons, taught in dignity that refused to bow. By nightfall, the moment had broken free from the news cycle and lodged itself in the bloodstream of American culture. Late-night comedians replayed the clip, pausing on Trump's red-faced fury before delivering punchlines that only underscored Obama's calm. Memes multiplied at lightning speed, side-by-side images captioned "chaos under Trump" and "calm under Obama," shared by millions as if the confrontation had distilled two philosophies of power into a single frame. The debate was no longer about a degree, it had become a cultural shorthand: calm, chaos. Even critics, those who had spent years sharpening their pens against Obama, found themselves conceding ground. Gregory Hines, a conservative columnist for the Washington Examiner, wrote reluctantly, "I've never admired Obama's politics, but last night he won that exchange. He didn't shout. He didn't sneer. He told the truth and he let his work stand." The column spread quickly, not because it was glowing, but because acknowledgement from the other side gave the moment weight. When your critics admit defeat, the culture itself takes notice. In coffee shops, barber shops, and subway cars, the line was repeated like a mantra. The truth doesn't need to shout, it endures. Strangers quoted it to each other, parents used it to lecture their kids, teachers scrawled it across whiteboards. It leapt from politics into the everyday, adopted, not as rhetoric, but as wisdom. What had started as a rebuttal was mutating into folklore, a phrase destined to live long after the stage lights dimmed. Meanwhile, artists seized it. Street murals bloomed overnight in Detroit and Los Angeles. Obama's face, calm and unshaken, painted beside words in towering block letters, "Education is earned, not given." Spoken word poets echoed the line on open mics, turning the exchange into performance, while musicians sampled his voice into tracks that blared through headphones across campuses. It was no longer just Obama's moment, it was everyone's to carry, reshape, and pass on. And yet beneath the celebration, a deeper current pulsed. Commentators on every network asked the same question in different words. Can a single moment reshape public memory of both men? Was Trump now branded forever by his outburst, his legacy tied to rage rather than strength? Was Obama's calm destined to be remembered, not as defense, but as dominance? The clash had crystallized something intangible, and the nation wrestled with whether it was rewriting history or revealing a truth that had been there all along. As the week closed, the clip still burned through feeds, not fading, but embedding, settling into the culture, like a stone dropped into water, its ripples stretching outward. And across America, from classrooms to living rooms, one question refused to die. Do viral moments rewrite history, or do they simply reveal what was always waiting beneath the noise? The clip had already become cultural shorthand, but its true power revealed itself in smaller, quieter places. In Chicago, a college sophomore sat hunched over her laptop, fingers trembling as she typed a short post. "Now I know my degree matters." She attached a picture of her textbook stacked high beside a half-empty coffee mug, her face lit by the glow of the screen. Within hours, her words were shared thousands of times, carried by students across the country who saw their own late nights and sacrifices reflected in her pride. At dinner tables in suburbs and small towns, families paused between bites to talk about what they had seen. A father in Cleveland told his kids facts still matter. Don't let anyone tell you different. His teenage daughter, who had been scrolling silently through her phone, looked up with a new kind of focus, repeating the line under her breath, as if trying it on for size. In kitchens from Des Moines to Dallas, parents used Obama's words as proof that the work their children were doing, the essays, the exams, the endless studying, wasn't just survival, but legacy. In New York, a high school teacher stood in front of her class, chalk in hand, and wrote across the board, "The truth doesn't need to shout. It endures." The room was silent, the students watching, as she turned, her voice breaking just enough to reveal the weight of her belief. "This is why we keep showing up," she said softly. "This is why the work matters." Heads nodded, some eyes shone with unexpected conviction. The phrase had left the studio and become a promise in classrooms, a reminder that education was more than paper. It was proof of resilience. And in the quiet of a veteran's living room, a man who had once doubted the value of degrees leaned back in his chair, his grandson's diploma framed on the wall. "Guess it does mean something," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. His wife squeezed his hand, and together they sat in silence, the television replaying Obama's calm voice like a hymn. For them, it wasn't about politics anymore. It was about faith in the simple idea that effort mattered, that truth outlived the noise. From the glow of a student's laptop to the hush of a family meal, the ripple spread soft but unstoppable. And in every corner it touched, it carried the same heartbeat of hope that facts could still anchor belief. And that dignity, when defended with calm, was a legacy no insult could erase. The applause had faded, the hashtag still burned. But what lingered was not the noise, it was the image. Barack Obama seated in his modest Chicago office, framed not by grandeur, but by restraint, his calm composure radiating through the split screen. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't slammed a desk, hadn't met fury with fury. He had simply stayed steady, letting his silence and his words carve deeper than any shout could reach. That image, glowing under the harsh studio lights, had already branded itself into memory. Cameras lingered on him even after the exchange was over, capturing the stillness of a man who knew the battle was won, not in noise, but in patience. Trump's face had flushed with rage, his hands restless, his voice ragged from shouting. Obama, by contrast, leaned back slightly, shoulders relaxed, his eyes steady, his voice still soft. The comparison was merciless, one unraveling, the other immovable. And the audience knew it. Respect hung in the air, filling every corner of the studio like smoke after a fire. On broadcasts replayed that night, narrators spoke over the footage, their tones hushed with recognition. "Truth doesn't expire," when shouted at, one voice intoned as the camera zoomed slowly onto Obama's faint smile. "It stands. It endures." The line echoed over clips of cheering crowds, over split screens of families watching at home, over hashtags flashing across the lower third of the screen. For millions, the soundbite became scripture. The composure became proof. And when the lights dimmed and the cameras finally cut, the lasting image wasn't of Trump's rage or even the thunderous applause, it was of Obama's stillness. The quiet confidence of a man who refused to be dragged into the chaos, who let the truth carry its own weight. It wasn't dramatic in the usual sense. It was something rarer, something harder to forget resolution. By the time anchors signed off and the screens went black, one thought remained whispered in newsrooms, echoed in classrooms, repeated at dinner tables: calm had triumphed over chaos. And the image that endured was simple yet indelible. Barack Obama, calm in the storm, proving that the truth doesn't need to shout. It simply waits, and in the end, it remains. When the dust of the confrontation settled, what endured was not the insult, Not the hashtags, not even the applause. It was the ripple of lives touched. Students who once doubted their worth now carried themselves taller, repeating Obama's words as if they were armor. Teachers, long dismissed as invisible, felt seen. Their classrooms suddenly elevated to symbols of endurance. Families gathered around tables not to argue, but to reflect their conversations, circling back to the same truth. Dignity outlives derision. Obama's legacy in that moment wasn't a clever line or a viral clip. It was the countless echoes of his lessons reverberating through others. Judge Carver's courtroom, Daniel Brooks's marches, every student who had once stayed late arguing about justice, these were the receipts no one could tear apart. His rebuttal had never really been about defending himself. It had been about holding up the mirror of lives, changed a resume, written not in ink, but in flesh and spirit. Trump's fury, once deafening, already felt like static, fading into the background. What lingered was the quiet Obama's steady tone, his composure under fire, his refusal to descend into noise. Narrators framed it perfectly. In a world of shouting, the voice that steadies is the one that remains. The line was not just commentary, but a moral etched into the night, replayed across news panels, whispered in classrooms, painted on murals in city streets. And so the clash ended, not with chaos, but with clarity. One man's legacy was reduced to noise, while the other's was amplified through the very people who carried it forward. The real victory was not on the stage, but in the hearts of those who chose to believe that truth once spoken calmly and clearly could still cut deeper than fury. The cameras went dark, but the question lingered, seared into the conscience of millions watching from every corner of the country. In your life, do you trust the loudest voice or the clearest truth? The clash between Donald Trump and Barack Obama on live television wasn't just politics, it was a mirror held up to our daily lives. One man shouted, pounded the table, and tried to drown out the air with volume. The other leaned back, breathed, and answered with calm clarity and lived proof. And in the end, it was the calm that endured. For those of us who have lived long enough to see storms rise and fall, the lesson is familiar, but urgent life will always have noise critics, doubters, even voices that try to erase what you've earned. But noise fades. What remains is the quiet strength of work done, people touched, and truth lived out over time. Think of the classrooms you've sat in, the families you've raised, the communities you've built. Your legacy is not in the shouts that tried to cut you down, but in the people who carry your lessons forward, the children who watched your sacrifices, the colleagues who learned from your example, the neighbors who felt your kindness. That is the proof. That is what endures. So the story asks us not just to admire a calm response on a stage, but to choose it for ourselves. When the world shouts at you, will you match its volume, or will you ground yourself in the truth you've lived? Because in the end, history does not remember the loudest voices. It remembers the clearest ones. Action question. In the face of noise, whether from politics, work, or family, how can you choose calm clarity this week, and who might carry the impact of that choice long after the shouting fades? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.